Hello and welcome to this video. I'm going to speak to you a little bit about the types of educational videos you can make and use in your class with your students, or even what you can do with your students and make videos together. There are many different types of educational videos you can work on. In this video I'm going to present to you 4+1 types of videos, and I'm going to explain why 4+1 instead of 5 later on. So we have basically four types of videos. The first one is guidance videos, the second one is demo videos, lecture videos, and informative videos, plus the interactive type of videos. So I'm going to go through all of these and explain to you what are their main differences, and I'm going to give you a few tips for each of these types. So starting with guidance videos. Guidance videos are basically the type of video in which you demonstrate to your students how to set up an experiment, or demo how to do a virtual lab, how to use a virtual lab. Basically what you're doing in this kind of videos is to explain to your students how to prepare in order to make an experiment, how to set up their experiment, how to use all the different options that a virtual lab has, or how to do a research using digital tools. So it's about giving them some guidance on how to prepare for an experiment. To do that effectively, you want to be very precise with regards to the keywords that you use. You need to use the proper keywords so your students can actually learn the language usually deployed in science. You want to make sure that each part of the setup is given to them separately, and it's clearly explained how each step follows the other in setting up the experiment. You have to make sure you spot all the tricky parts of an experiment, of the setup of the experiment, and make sure you focus particularly on those and explain to your students how to handle those. And then, depending on the experiment, you might want to consider different experimental procedures and different alternatives for the setup. For example, when you have an experiment that your students have to do at home using everyday tools, you might want to consider different options to make sure that every kid has at least some of these available at home so they can do their experiment. Because this is a guidance video and it's very much related to inquiries, we're talking about an experiment. It's important to think about the type of guidelines that you make available to your students and how detailed you want to be. So when we're talking about instructions about how to set up an experiment, that means that the instructions should facilitate the student, and it should not be a ready-made recipe for them to follow. It shouldn't be a step-by-step instruction that doesn't give room to your students to think critically and creatively. Depending on your students, so how old they are, how familiar they are with inquiry, it's up to you to decide how open or guided your instructions are going to be, which steps you're going to describe in more detail, if you want to skip the guidance on some of the steps of the setup. But in any case, no matter how open or guided your instructions are, always make sure that you give your students room to think creatively and have room to make decisions, and they could think some alternatives on their own on how to set up. These kind of videos are very useful for both online and in class settings. particularly for online settings, these kind of videos can be very helpful when it comes to students performing experiments at home. It's not easy to show them sometimes what they will need to do to prepare. So having a video handy is very useful. Within class settings, where you can actually guide your students on the spot, there are a couple of ways why you could also use these kind of videos. The first one is if you want to use a flipped classroom approach. So you want to give that video to your students as preparation before coming to class. Or if you have a lot of students and a lot of groups, and you cannot be you cannot be everywhere at the same time, it's good to have the video as reference for each team to look at it and do the setup on their own without having to call you every second minute. Now, coming to demo videos, these are different to the guidance videos in the sense that in this kind of videos we're actually demonstrating the experiment itself. It's not about how to set up and then do the experiment on your own. It's about demonstrating the experimental process or a phenomenon to your students. Again, while doing that, while recording such a demo, you also need to make sure that you're using the proper keywords, the proper language, and that you explain to your students what each part of the setup is responsible for, what are the instruments, what are they doing, how they're handled. It is also a good idea to make sure you focus particularly on how each step of the experimentation process is taking place. Make sure that every step of the experiment is clear, and clearly demonstrate to your students what are the key steps of the experiment, and include some alternatives again if needs be. And since we're talking about experimentation again, demos and inquiry are very much related here. You need to make sure that your students understand the basic process they will need to follow in order to have a successful experiment, how they should properly use the materials that they have, the setup that they have, make sure that they're following the right scientific steps. For example, students might often go ahead and change more than one variables at the same time while measuring, which is something we don't want them to do. So some key elements of experimentation should be pointed out, so students understand what are the key elements of a successful experiment. In the same spirit, you also want to demonstrate to them how the data collected can be properly recorded, because it's an essential part that sometimes students are too distracted to do properly. And in general, it's a great opportunity for you to demonstrate to your students the rules, the attitudes, and the behaviors that they need to follow in order to have a successful experimentation. When teaching in an online setting, well, actually both in online and in in-class setting, demo videos can be quite useful, especially when we're talking about experiments that students cannot do on their own, either at home or at school. Some experiments, for example, may have very, very expensive equipment which cannot be made available, or some experiments may be dangerous to do. These kind of experiments, instead of leaving them completely out of the curriculum, it is good to have a demo video to demonstrate them to the students. It's also a good idea to have this kind of videos as a comparison to what students are doing. If you ask them to do a video at school or at home and they follow their own experimental procedure, they do their own setup, then they can watch a video that you have prepared and compare their experiment to the one demonstrated in your video. And this will also help them assess a little bit their application skills, because they're going to see how an experiment is properly conducted. Again, when we're talking about in-class settings or even online actually, these kind of videos can also be handy with a flipped classroom approach. You might want to skip the experimentation process for some reason and go straight to the data collecting and data processing part. So having that demo is going to make the process a little bit faster. Now, moving on to lecture videos. This is in fact the kind of video that clones the typical lectures we would find in a class. So basically it is the teacher, the lecturer, that is doing the talking. This might sound a little bit boring type of videos, but it's good to have, and I'm going to explain to you in a little bit why. There are two different types we usually do. One is recording yourself in front of the camera and just have your face being displayed, or you can have the teacher recording in front of the camera while using a presentation like I'm doing right now, or even a whiteboard on which you're writing, just like you would do in a normal class. In this kind of videos, unlike a face-to-face lecture, you really don't want to make it to get distracted and let it become a long video. You want to keep it as short as possible and to the point. It's better to do small, multiple targeted videos that complement each other rather than doing a really long one. It's also important when you're recording yourself in any kind of video, in fact not just the lecture videos, it is a good idea to keep in mind that you shouldn't be talking too fast, maybe a tad slower than you would normally speak in class, and give room to the viewer to take in all that you're saying. Because we know that especially students don't really like long videos and their attention is vanished after 2 or 3 minutes, you want to make sure you're not tiring the viewers. So it's a good idea to keep your options open and include multiple means of communication. Maybe include some happy joke here and there, include some videos, include some images, or some interesting little highlights for your video to make them a little bit up-tempo for your students. When teaching in class, lecture videos are probably not that useful to have, but it would be very useful when you have students that have missed the lecture, for example. Instead of losing the lecture, they can just watch the recording and catch up. Or you can use it for all your students in case they need to go back to that lecture and revise it, or when they're reading for an exam, they might also want to go and reference that. Obviously, it's very useful for online settings because it can support asynchronous learning. Again, you can review the lecture or maybe part of it, and it allows students to have their own learning speed because you can always pause a video and start later on again. Coming to the fourth type of video, the informative videos. This is basically the kind of video which you can make if you have a lot more to say about a subject, but you don't want to cramp your lecture video. So instead of spending extra time in class for additional conversation, if you don't have the time, you can have an informative video to give to your students additional information on the subject at hand, and maybe some information that could further spark their interest. In this kind of video, you want to make sure that the additional information is actually of added value to your students and it's not tedious details. You want to use these videos to highlight the added value of a concept, how it is related to natural phenomena, maybe to technology, to engineering achievements. But still, make sure you keep it short and to the point, and you don't make too long videos. And try not to focus on repeating the same information again and again. These videos can be in either type of setting, a complementary video to the core lesson, and in combination with the flipped classroom approach, you can use such videos to intrigue your students, spark their engagement, and give a really interesting introduction to your subject. You can have now the +1 type of videos. So why this is a +1? Because any type of video that we have discussed already, any of the 4 types, can become an interactive video. Interactive videos are the kind of videos which have features in them embedded, like polls or flashcards or short quizzes or open-ended questions, and many other kind of interactive points. So any kind of video you're making, you can always turn it into an interactive video by adding features like those mentioned here. Make sure you don't overdo it and you don't put too many interaction points. If there is no skip option, it's a good idea to have also a non-interactive version of the same video for the students to use when they're revisiting the video. And make sure you keep interactive tasks to the point so videos are not overextended. Any type of these videos can also be prepared not just by you but also from your students. It's a nice idea to allow your students, to give them the opportunity to make videos, to communicate a project. That, especially when they're documenting an experimental procedure, it will help them increase their understanding of an experiment. It can help them compare what they're doing. It can increase their engagement because students really like to make this kind of videos, especially students who are not very interested and not very engaged when it comes to written assignments. And you as a teacher can also use the videos made by your students in order to assess them and particularly to assess their skills. Finally, the context of use, depending on which part of the inquiry phase a teacher is, different videos can be more useful than others. That doesn't mean you can use any kind of video in any type of inquiry, in any phase, but in this table we are demonstrating which are the ones used the most in each phase. So usually for orientation we have informative videos that give an introduction. For conceptualization we might have lecture videos. Investigation is usually using guidance and demo videos, and sometimes maybe informative. Conclusion, either lecture or informative, and then discussion, a demo, a lecture, or an informative video. So this is all about the types of videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.